Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Good Book Club. This is our September edition. It is September 8th. We welcome everybody, and it's the beginning of our brand new season. Our book club seasons go September to August, so we have a whole new crop of books to read. This is the first one of the new season, and we're actually entering our 5th year. I honestly can't believe that it's been that long, and I'm so happy as I look out among our participants to see that there are people that have been with us for the entire 5 years. This is just amazing to me. So congratulations to everybody who's stuck with us. It's, I think, been a really meaningful journey, and it continues. So I will go ahead and read our mission statement, especially since we have a few new people that are with us. And this is a statement we came up with in our very beginning of the club, and it just kind of explains who we are and what our goals were. It says the Good Book Club mission statement. The Good Book Club was created to bring together nuanced and post-Mormons and others with a shared interest in Mormonism. We are introspective, critical thinkers seeking to learn, connect, and build relationships through the catalyst of literature. We welcome all who are searching for a safe space to share authentic thoughts, feelings, and ideas through open dialogue and shared experiences relative to Mormon culture. As we deconstruct previous beliefs, we encourage all to find happiness in the process of discovering new religious ideologies, spirituality, and life philosophies. And as I read this and think back over the past, 4 whole seasons, we've done a pretty good job. So this is great. All right, let's go through a couple little quick slides and then we'll get right to our presentation. I want to remind everybody, as I said, that our new book list is out. We have sent that out via email to those of you that are on the email list. It's posted under and pinned under the featured tab on Facebook. Bruce is going to throw this in the chat if you guys want to copy and paste. But we have amazing books suggested by all of you. And there's only one book, I think, that we do not have a discussion leader yet for, and that is Being Mortal. And that is June 8th of the 2025 season. So if you are interested in leading that discussion, meaning that you just, familiarize yourself with the book, read the book, and then you're kind of the one that facilitates discussion, asks questions, and kind of guides the discussion, we would love to have anybody who would like to sign up for that last slot, Being Mortal, on June 8th. So send me a message, put it in the chat, email, text, whatever, let us know. So it's going to be a great season. Our next book, now we're going to be talking about this a little more in depth at the end, but oh my gosh, Armageddon, Bart Ehrman, grab a copy right now. This is going to be an amazing book, especially for October. There's a lot of scary rhetoric in here from Revelations, perfect for October, but we'll talk about this more at the end of our meeting as a preview. And we really don't have that many more announcements this time. It's kind of a light month for announcements. So we will move now right into our discussion, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Can I say that quietly? By Mark Manson, and our discussion leader is Kendall.
All right, yeah, let me get this up here. And I'm so glad that I got my book recommendations to you right before the new season started. This was one of the books I suggested, although to be completely honest, it was lower on my list. I hadn't heard of Mark before this. And my limited exposure, I was kind of like, oh, he has some good thoughts, but I don't really know if he's an expert in anything. And like reading his story, he's just he styles himself as an anti self-help guru. So, take that for what it's worth. But anyway, the book is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, a Counterintuitive Approach to Living a Good Life by Mark Manson. My presentation will go over these things: not letting petty things bother you, to the degree which we are self-deluded, what we should give an F about, and what really matters in happiness, at least according to the author, Mark Manson. So I'm going to start off with what is in his introduction. He says, conventional life advice is fixating on what you lack. It lasers in on what you perceive your personal shortcomings and failures to already be, and then emphasizes them for you. You learn about the best ways to make money because you feel you don't have enough money already. You stand in front of the mirror and repeat affirmations saying that you're beautiful because you feel as though you're not beautiful already. You follow dating and relationship advice because you feel that you're unlovable already. You try goofy visualization exercises about being more successful because you feel as though you aren't successful enough already. Ironically, this fixation on the positive, on what's better, what's superior, only serves to remind us over and over again of what we are not, of what we lack, of what we should have been but failed to be. After all, no truly happy person feels the need to stand in front of a mirror and recite that she's happy. She just is. So again, he's trying to portray this as like, I'm rejecting traditional advice and I'm going to turn a lot of concepts on their heads. Whether or not he succeeds at that, it will be up to us. But he even admits in one of the clips that I'm going to show that a lot of this stuff is common knowledge. He just puts his own spin on it. But I do really like in this section of the book how he says something to the effect of the self-help industry does have this complex of like telling you all the things that you lack so that it can sell you more. Like this goes into his greater theme of wanting more, and so you're vulnerable to be sold to, and putting other people's priorities above the things that like maybe you want to give a fuck about. So anyway, any comments about that idea or this quote before we go on? Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, I just had a general comment that I was thinking as he was talking, I'm going like, boy, he's describing his experiences that don't mirror mine coming out of Mormonism. I mean, the general, to use the vocabulary of the book, the general mind fuck of Mormonism. And I mean, I came out of, being taught I was a piece of shit. I was unworthy. I was broken, and trying to navigate life from that point of view. And when he was talking about, traveling a little, and I'm going like, yeah, I got traveled, 2 years in Chile and stuff. So I was going like, man, his view of how life works is different than mine. And it's different than a lot of our post-Mormon people's lives have been.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of a quote by Thomas S. Matson, actually, who said, we need to be reminded more often than we need to be instructed. So that's kind of what this book was for me, is like, I've heard almost all this before. So it's just a good reminder. Not a lot was really new. But yeah. Okay, let's move on here. So here's a clip about kind of what he's saying, like the reverse nature of this book, or at least that's his intent. So one of the first things he goes over is what he calls the backwards law.
The big idea to take away from chapter 1, and this is the most underlying thing in the book and one of the most underlying things on Amazon Kindle ever, is something called the backwards law. And the backwards law originally comes from Alan Watts, but I rephrase it in my own way. And I say that the pursuit of positive experience is itself a negative experience, and the acceptance of a negative experience is itself a positive experience. So I go on and give a number of examples of the backwards law. I say that the idea is that the more that you pursue feeling better all the time, the less satisfied you become, as pursuing something only reinforces the fact that you lack it in the first place. So the backwards law introduces the central theme of the book, which is that negativity is actually the path to positivity. Most people's assumption is they just want the positive experiences from life, but it's actually the tolerance and acceptance of the negative experience that leads to the positive experience. And I will end up spending pretty much the entire book expanding upon this.
Yeah, so negativity is the path to positivity. It's the tolerance and acceptance of that negativity that leads to the better future positive experiences. And this was a huge part of my personal story leaving Mormonism. Is I was just shocked at how many people's reaction to like the fact that I was divorced. Like I followed the perfect Mormon path 100%. And then the moment I had one imperfection, people are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like this is, I don't know how to deal with this. Like you need to get remarried and then I can talk to you again. Like almost to that extent. And I remember reading No Nonsense Buddhism by Noah Rasheta. And one of the central themes was like, the bad that happens, like you should expect it. You should embrace it. You shouldn't be afraid of it. In fact, it can lead to better growth. And that is one of the things I love most about my post-Mormon life is I really do not fear my weaknesses, my imperfections, and I know that I grow more from my failures than if I pretend I'm perfect and following everything all the time. So any comments on that? Yeah, Rebecca.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, in the church, any negative experience, negative thought, negative outcome is the adversary, right? Or even worse than that, is something that you have done yourself or have not done enough of to make this happen. And perfection and happiness is always right around the corner. So you're always just in this constant state of, I don't know, not really being in your life. You're not really, I don't know, you're not recognizing your experiences because it's some kind of outside force that's doing it. You can't just embrace this as a negative. What am I going to learn from this? Why did this happen? Maybe it just randomly happened. There's no such thing as that whatsoever. So you can never learn from anything. You can never grow. It's always some outside force working on you. And there's some outside force that's eventually going to lead to your happiness, your contentment, to everything going right, your kids coming back to church, or your husband or you getting the great job. Something else is going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, again, it's you. It's all
Yeah,
you. So it's
absolutely.
very difficult. And you don't really see that. You don't really see why there's just this sense of underlying, I'm not in control of my own life. I'm just rudderless in the church until you get outside of us. And then you're like, I embrace it. I messed up. I did it. I'm going to learn from this. Again, embracing negativity, turning it into positivity. There's no mechanism to do that, at least that I found being a member of the church.
Oh, it was so difficult in the church. I literally felt the pressure to appear perfect all the time. And if you couldn't do that, then like, just don't talk, like what's that scripture in Messiah? Like, consider the blessed and happy state of those that follow the commandments of God, for they flourish in all things, or whatever. And like, I really felt that like, if I didn't like portray that, then everyone would know that I'm not one of the chosen ones, Landon.
I'm an eternal pessimist, so this book made me feel good about myself. I think as a pessimist, it seems like the whole world's against you. Like that, you can't say anything negative. That I don't want negative vibes. I only want to surround myself with positive people. But we have to have negativity in the world just as much as we have to have positivity. And you think about, who wants to get on an airplane with a pilot that looks and says, do we have enough gas? We probably have enough. You don't want someone that positive. You got to have some negativity. And in my role, in my workplace, we do project management. And I always tell my project managers, it's not the good things that are going to get you. It's the bad things. You need to be looking for everything that can go wrong and try to plan around it and have a backup plan or a contingency plan for what you're going to do when this part doesn't show up on time, or when the subcontractor doesn't show up when he's supposed to. How are you going to get the job done? So you're always looking at the negative things and saying, what bad is going to happen and what can I do now to prevent that from happening? And so I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to be negative, and so that's why I kind of like the book. Made me feel kind of better about myself.
Absolutely, Landon. I am vibing with that 100%. I've always been frustrated with, I guess we call it Mormon culture. I have lots of problems with that terms for other reasons, but that's one of the themes in his book overall that I really, really liked, which is like things like this and other things which we'll go over, and the relation to accepting reality as it really is, like getting to the truth of the matter. And on page 29, he says, this is why it's so dangerous about a society that coddles itself more and more from the discomforts of life. We lose the benefits of experiencing healthy doses of pain, loss that disconnects us from, a loss that disconnects us from the reality of the world around us. And again, that's kind of my story of leaving the church. Is like, it was really hard. Like, I had existential dread and all this, bad stuff that happened as a result of me losing my belief system. But on the other side of it, I have this love affair now with being confident that I am seeing the world as it really is. Yeah, it's different than what I was taught it is, but I feel like it's real and authentic, and I can solve problems better and be more equipped to handle that reality rather than just lying to myself as a form of coping. Bruce and then Brian.
Well, Brian was first.
Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about this concept of embracing negativity and not getting caught in these feedback loops. I think it's a good point. But one thing was kind of grating with me, it's just the way he presented this concept. And it's kind of something that ran as a theme through the book. I don't know what page it's on because I had the digital copy. But I'm just going to read a short quote. He's like, ever notice that sometimes when you care less about something, you do better at it? Notice how it's often the person who is least invested in the success of something that actually ends up achieving it. Notice sometimes when you stop giving a F, everything seems to fall into place. So that's how he presents it. And like, maybe that's true sometimes, but then he goes on to like, talk about how that's always true. And I don't, in this particular concept, no, that's not true. Like in general, people who put in hard work and perseverance, that's usually going to pay off in the end. And so this attitude, like, but he kind of presents things that way. Ever notice this? And then presents it as if it's a truism. It's like, no, like that's just an anecdote that might be true sometimes and not true other times. So that was just a general.
Yeah, I'm going to heavily agree with you there. This is a criticism I have with many authors, including my own writing, is like, in order to craft like a compelling like line of argument for your greater points, you kind of have to cherry pick a few things to make it seem like it's more prevalent so that it's a pattern. Like if you know about the history of the book Good to Great, that's a perfect example. Like he cherry picks these things, and then 5 years later after the fact, if you really look into the numbers of those businesses, it's really not what he wants it to be. But anyway.
Yeah, he just kind of it's like it's a universal truth. Like, and I think that he brings up a good point here that we can all get caught in like cycles of pursuing things and get caught in that feedback loop that he talks about that ends up being generally unhealthy. But I didn't agree with the other point of like, oh, did you ever notice that sometimes when people try less, they actually succeed more? So don't try. And it's like, no, I don't think so. Like, if you want to become a really good at a musical instrument, you need to practice. You need to put in the effort. You need to put in the time. It's not like I'm just going to stop trying and expect to get better at piano. Like that's not how.
Right, but at least in the social sphere, that's kind of like my area of expertise is like our internal psychology. That actually bears a lot of fruit in relationships and like in public speaking and stuff. If you are very concerned and care a lot, you actually have less cognitive capacity to be in the moment. And so when you let go and you don't care, then you're actually more present and have more brain power able to dedicate to that moment. So you do succeed more. So there's pluses and minuses.
That makes sense, Kendall, but that's not what he presented. That's not the way he said it. I would agree with what you said, but I wouldn't necessarily agree with the paragraph that I read.
Right. Yeah. I think the key word is sometimes. It's not a truism. Yeah.
Yeah. I just had, it came to mind, the Mormon concept of death was so distorted for me. Like it almost came to the point like, well, death doesn't matter. They're just going on to the other side and everything's going to be fine. And he gets back to it towards the end of the book, kind of the stoic memento mori, remembering we're going to die, because having left the church and realized that one, I don't think there's life after death, and two, that I don't get my own planet. But, things like that really has changed how I interact with the world, because this life is it. And I'm older and I've got, if I'm lucky, a quarter of my life left. And what am I going to do with it? So yeah, it's an interesting thing once you get out of that thought process that life can be different for you.
Right. And to embrace the harsh reality of that. Like just a side note on that, like when I was a kid, I didn't attend many funerals, maybe, 5 or 6. But I think in almost all of them, if not all of them, I observed someone telling someone else, like, it's selfish to feel sad. You should feel happy for them. Like some variation of that, conversation happened. And now I just look back and I'm like, holy cow. But that's where the logic goes if you accept the doctrine, like it's just a way to cope with this thing we call death. All right. So let's move on here. And he starts introducing some subtleties. He calls it the three subtleties of the book. And so this is where, for me, it starts getting into like the biggest idea of the book. And he gives it in these three subtleties. So part of the biggest idea is not giving an F isn't about not caring. He says like only psychopaths really don't care. We all care about things. Rather, the key is to not give an F about everything and everyone. That goes into my point earlier about, how businesses want you to care about the things that they portray in advertising so they can sell you more. You've got to, really reach inside. And that's this book in 3 words, is to value better things. So on page 16, he says, when we say, damn, watch out, Mark Manson, just don't give an F, we don't mean that Mark Manson doesn't care about anything. On the contrary, we mean that Mark Manson doesn't care about adversity in the face of his goals. He doesn't care about pissing some people off to do what he feels is right or important or noble. The point isn't to get away from the shit, it's to define the shit that is worth giving yourself to. The point isn't to get away from the shit. The point is to find the shit you enjoy dealing with. So again, before I read the book, part of the appeal to me was like, yeah, I would love to just like not give an F about all these things. That'd be so great. But that's kind of a misconception about the book that he dispels here. So it's not about just not caring what anyone thinks. Like that's kind of a myth. We all care about stuff. And that dovetails into his other subtlety.
The give a fuck framework. And I have 3 subtleties of not giving a fuck. So subtlety number 1 is not giving a fuck does not mean being indifferent. It means being comfortable with being different. And kind of the conclusion that arises is that if you give a fuck about a few very important things, then the small things cease to bother you so much.
So a small thought there, like really, but I think that is his biggest point. He emphasizes that throughout the book. He ends on that note. Like if you have a problem giving a fuck about too many things and you're overburdened, he says the big idea, the solution is to value better things, have more meaningful things to give an F about in your life. And that's when all these things that are vexing you will fade away and not have so much power over your life. So what are some thoughts about that? I think that's his main point summed up in just a few sentences. Yeah, Landon.
Yeah, for me, when I was leaving the church, this was really a tough one, because as you're struggling and you're thinking about leaving, the first thing that you're saying, what's my family going to think? What are my kids going to think? What are my neighbors? What's my bishop going to think? And you finally had to get to the point where you just said, I don't care what anybody says. The truth is what I found, and that's what matters to me. And everyone else can say what they want, treat me how they want. I don't care anymore. And once you get to that point, it really releases a lot of that stress and a lot of that pressure. So I think I found that to be true anyway, that once you get to the point where you just say, I don't care anymore, it frees you up to really do what you really believe in.
Yeah, for me, it reminded me 100% of the last book I presented on how minds change, and how like you don't change unless the pain to keep your current belief is so vexing, so overwhelming in your life that you can't live your life day to day without making a change. And I hope I'm not breaking confidences. I'm not going to give his name, but one person I went to college with, super strong member of the church. I'd never, like myself, actually, I never thought he or I would ever leave. And he posted on Facebook this story about like he feels forced to leave because he was assigned a ministering brother that, unbeknownst to him until after the fact, had some sexual abuse history, child molestation. And the bishop was like protecting him. And moreover, when he, started making an issue of it, this bishop started shaming him over his concerns. And so like it's exactly what Landon, described. Like all of a sudden, like my friend like had to give a fuck about the safety of his family over his belief. Like leaving his belief system was almost like not easy, but like inevitable, because he had something so much bigger to protect and care about, protecting his family and his children from this predator in his mind. So anyway, that's the give a fuck framework. It's not about being indifferent. It's about choosing the most important things, and that's how we get away from all this pettiness and being overburdened. Any last comments? Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, I have a family member who they were in a ward in a state, and there was someone who was known to have sexual predator problems that was put in as a child's Sunday school teacher. And this family member took the girl that was in his class to Relief Society and wouldn't let that go. The whole ward started doing things against them because, and finally they just chose to move from out of state to Utah. But, they standing up for something that is going wrong will often get you ostracized from the group.
Yep. I don't know if you guys know about the website where it's just a map of the whole world, and people say like, this is when I lost my testimony, this is when I left the church, and why. And one of the themes, I read that every so often, just because I'm curious. And one of the most common responses is like, the church worked for me until it didn't, or like everything was fine with me in the church until I disagreed. And that's very much my story. Is like once I had like, wait, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't work, then it's like, well, you're the problem now. Like everything changes when that happens, at least in my view. Okay. Let's continue here. So yeah, just what we've already talked about. The big idea is to care better, have different higher values. I really, really, really like this quote on page 18. Sorry, it's a little bit longer. The problem with people who hand out fucks like ice cream at a goddamn summer camp is they don't have anything more fuck-worthy to dedicate their fucks to. If you find yourself consistently giving too many fucks about trivial shit that bothers you, your ex-boyfriend's new Facebook picture, how quickly the batteries die in your TV remote, missing yet another 2-for-1 sale on hand sanitizer, chances are you don't have much going on in your life to give a legitimate F about. And that's your problem, not the hand sanitizer, not the TV remote. I once heard an artist say that when a person has no problems, the mind automatically finds a way to invent some. I think that what most people, especially educated, pampered, middle-class white people, consider life problems are really just side effects of not having anything more important to worry about. It then follows that finding something important and meaningful in your life is perhaps the most productive use of your time and energy. Because if you don't find that meaningful something, your Fs will be given to meaningless and frivolous causes. And I think Brian had it right that like this is kind of just a redux of other advice. Like this really for me is like Stoicism and Buddhism just like repackaged. And that's been one of the most helpful sources of enlightenment post-faith crisis for me, is those two sources. And I just remember after I got married, something happened like during the night, like our cat like knocked over something. And I remember my wife at the time was like, oh, you have to like check on, the electronic setup in the other room. Like I think it all crashed down. Like, okay, well, if it crashed down, we'll just, buy new equipment. Like we don't have to give up our sleep now for something we can't do anything about, because, just where's your focus? Like, do you really care about material things, or do you care about other things? All right. So he kind of just says that in this clip.
Subtlety number 2 is to not give a fuck about adversity. You must first give a fuck about something more important than adversity. So if you're always worrying about what people think about you, the problem is not what people think about you. The problem is you don't have anything better to worry about. If you're always worried about how much money you have, the problem is not how much money you have. The problem is that you don't have anything better to worry about.
And the example that comes to mind in the positive sense for this is like, has anyone in their life or like recently known someone in their life that like recently got into a new relationship or fallen in love, and like, you know, right after that moment, that like very vulnerable moment where like, oh, do they like me like the way I like them? And the answer is yes for two people. Like if you talk to them, you realize that all these things that like, you know, bother me on a day-to-day basis, like they don't care. They are so happy. They are overwhelmed with this like one event that happened that like they really don't give an F about other stuff. So I think this rings true. I don't really know how helpful it is. Like he doesn't really go into specifics of like you know, this is how to get yourself to care. Like he does give some helpful tips about what you should value, but to me that doesn't really do it on an innate level. But I do really like this idea on an intellectual level. So any thoughts on that before we move on? Okay. So again, surpass the petty. We are essentially giving Fs about things that don't matter. So what self-improvement is about really prioritizing better values, choosing better things to give an F about, because when you give better Fs, you get better problems. And when you get better problems, you get a better life. We'll focus more on that idea later. But again, going into the other book we talked about, How Minds Change, a lot of this goes back into evolution and how we're wired. I thought this point of why we're this way, why do we naturally give an F about so many petty things? I thought his insight on this was really enlightening.
Suffering has a certain evolutionary usefulness to it. Like if you think about evolution over the course of hundreds of thousands of years, a creature that is happy all the time, that creature is not going to survive. It's actually the creature that is a little bit dissatisfied all the time, a little bit anxious all the time, a little bit paranoid, a little bit pissed off at the people around them. Like that's the creature that's going to do the most work to actually survive and replicate. I think this modern idea that we shouldn't have to feel bad ever is completely misguided. Not only is it misguided, but it goes against our evolutionary nature, our genetic nature. Negative emotions have an inherent purpose to them and they help us. And so a lot of this chapter is describing how a lot of the anxiety that we wish to escape from or the anger we wish to overcome, these emotions are actually signals within our body to do something. They are important signals, and if we ignore them or if we train ourselves to ignore them, then we are actually limiting ourselves in a lot of ways.
Yeah, so he teaches in the book this concept of the feedback loop from hell of like, oh, like I'm worried that I'm worried, or I'm angry that I got angry. And just understanding that like, look, it's not completely on me, these things that are happening, like my own biology, my own psychology is working against me because my ancestors, the ones that passed on their genes, were just naturally like a little bit more anxious because it was good at the time for survival. Like that's just a really helpful insight into my own psyche that helped me. I don't know if anyone has similar strong feelings, but I thought that was a good point. Okay. Oh yeah, Landon.
Yeah, this part of the book was one that actually I thought about that for quite a bit because, you know, none of us like suffering or discomfort or anything like that. But for me, that is a big motivator. I can't stand having something hanging over my head that's bothering me, and so it motivates me to get something done because of it. And I know at work, if it's just a little problem, I'm like, I'll take care of that later. I push it off. It's not, but when it's like, oh crap, this is a big problem. That's the one I jump in. I better dig in. I better spend time. If I have to work late to get it solved, that's what you do. And I hate that feeling, but it made me realize I hate that, but it also is what motivates me to get something done as well.
Yeah, the last third of the book, he calls that the do something principle. Like if we were satisfied, we wouldn't do something. But if you have a problem, you have to start doing action for it to change. But if you don't care, you won't take those actions. Like it sounds really simple, but that is how I've observed things happen in my life. Like I don't really start moving until, it bothers me or the pain is high enough. Like that's just I'm an animal, and that's just how we're wired. Like it's not really logical to expend all this energy on things that aren't important, that don't really affect you that much, that are minor. Okay, so another problem he identifies is our natural propensity to denial. He says on page 32, people deny and blame others for their problems for the simple reason that it's easy and it feels good. While solving problems is hard and often feels bad. Forms of blame and denial give us a quick high. How many people do you know are like so happy, but in huge amounts of denial? There are ways to temporarily escape problems, and that escape can provide us a quick rush that makes us feel better. Highs come in many forms: alcohol, the moral righteousness that comes from blame, or the thrill of some new risky adventure. Highs tend to be shallow and unproductive ways to go about one's life. Much of the self-help world is predicated on peddling highs to people rather than solving legitimate problems. Many self-help gurus teach you new forms of denial and pump you up with exercises that feel good in the short term while ignoring the underlying issue. Remember, nobody who is actually happy has to stand in front of a mirror and tell himself that he's happy. Highs also generate addiction. The more you rely on them to feel about your underlying problems, the more you will seek them out. In this sense, almost anything can become addictive depending on the motivation behind using it. We all have our chosen methods to numb the pain of our problems, and in moderate doses, there is nothing wrong with this. But the longer we avoid and the longer we numb, the more painful it will be when we finally do confront our issues. And again, like when I'm presenting, I'm so fresh out of the church, I always relate it back to that. But the first thing this made me think of is the thought-stopping cliches that we pass around in the church of like, oh, there's this problem, but here's this like really superficial, easy answer that's going to direct your mind to something else so you don't have to worry about it. Like, oh, we'll figure that out in the next life, or God's ways are higher than our ways. And like religion kind of is a factory for like, oh, you don't have to worry about death and these big things. Like here's these like platitudes that make you feel good temporarily so that you can move on with your life. But it's not really equipping you to make your life legitimately better. Bruce.
Yeah, I just, when we were going over this, I'm just going like, okay, at least my experience of the church was constantly being told I wasn't good enough. I wasn't trying to achieve anything. I was just trying to stay out of the way of hating myself so much. And, I think as former Mormons, we have a bit of a different experience because the culture is telling us you're broken. And that's how they keep you in line, is to convince you that you're broken, and you get fixed by paying money and doing what others tell you to do. So just my observation.
Yeah, and he goes on right after this quote: just because something feels bad doesn't mean it is bad. Just because something feels good doesn't mean it is good. Pain serves a perfect purpose. Don't avoid, don't deny. Because I think, Bruce, what you said is absolutely true. But my personal experience was more of this sense of like, no, we're all good here all the time. We're all positive. We're all happy. And it was never otherwise. And we can't acknowledge problems. We can't talk about problems because that's not part of the true church programming. Yvonne.
You're muted. Yeah.
Muted. Okay. No, it just came into my mind, and what you said, how unhelpful the advice of the church is when we have problems, because it doesn't seem like there would be any problem, but you could solve it by reading the scriptures,
Oh, yes.
saying your
yes.
prayers, attend your meetings, blah, blah, blah. And you just got so tired of, you just knew that that sometimes they would, a complicated situation they would present in a talk or some problems. But that was always the answer. And I just got so tired of hearing that. But thanks for that. And I did like how I resonated with the title just a few pages back where he said that happiness actually comes from solving problems. And he gets more into that in the farther on in the book. But yeah.
Yeah, ever since I was in middle school, I started collecting quotes, and that was one of the first quotes I ever wrote down. It was from Margaret Thatcher, and she says, "Look at a day where you're supremely satisfied at the end of that day. It's not a day where you sat about doing nothing. It's a day that you had everything to do and you did it." Like a part of that I feel mixed feelings about, because I feel like my worth as a human has been equated to my accomplishments. Like I'm only worthy of love if I have lots of accomplishments to show for it. So I don't want to go to that extreme. But at the same time, I resonate very much with, like, if we're actually doing good, if we're actually solving problems, that is truly satisfying. And we shouldn't accept these substitutes, these Twinkies of life that feel good in the short term but have no substance. All right, yeah, Bruce, and then we'll go on.
Yeah, I was at an ex-Mormon gathering yesterday in Torrance, and we had a new couple they brought their 3 kids, and they're just freshly out. And the wife, who's from a foreign country but third generation Mormon, so she's Mormon royalty from the country she's from, and she had postpartum depression. And she said she was talking to her mother, and she said her mother said, "Well, are you reading your scriptures? Are you going to the temple?" And she says, "That was so unhelpful. I needed to see a doctor and I needed to get on some medication, and that solved it." And she says, "I only had it with the middle kid, but the church narrative just did not help." And she was getting that from all sides. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting how that works.
Yeah, and really, like, only in the last 2 years have I really realized that, like, my upbringing, I wasn't really equipped with how to interact and acknowledge with negativity. It was 100% you just suppress it, avoid it, dismiss it. But he says on page 84, negative emotions are a necessary component of emotional health. To deny that negativity is to perpetuate problems rather than solve them. And, like, again, I don't want to get too personal, but just in, like, my personal life, in the people I'm closest to that I was raised with, like, there's a lot of things that, like, our way of coping is just perpetuating the same things. Like, I was talking with my best friend the other day, and I realized that someone that I thought was really wise and, like, a helpful mentor in my life, like, he has never given me any substantive, like, really helpful advice. It really every time came down to, like, what does the spirit tell you? Like, how do you, like, have you prayed about it? Like, he would just defer the problem with these, like, empty platitudes that really weren't that helpful when you got down to it at the end of the day. Okay. And so he just explains that this, can perpetuate into even worse things, into, like, narcissism and entitlement. So this is what this clip is about.
Form number 1 is, I'm awesome and the rest of you all suck, therefore I deserve to have special treatment. Form number 2 is, I suck and the rest of you are awesome, so I deserve special treatment. So in the psychological research, this is known as grandiose narcissism versus victim narcissism. And it's basically, they seem to be opposites on the surface. Like, one person thinks he's better than everybody, and then the other person thinks he's worse than everybody. But the behavior ends up being the same, because both people have delusional beliefs about their place in the status hierarchy. One person thinks he's at the top, one person thinks he's at the bottom, but the behavior ends up being the same. They end up being completely self-absorbed. They think everything in the world should be altered and catered to them. And yeah, they just become unbearable to be around.
The first thing I thought of at this part of the book was the exceptions the church wants for their building temples. Like, the rules don't apply to us. Like, we're grandiose. Like, we are absolutely entitled to our temples and our steeple height. That was just, I couldn't have scripted it better than that. But in this part of the book, he talks about how like social media exacerbates this problem because, you know, everyone's just showing a certain curated part of themselves, and so they think, you know, there's something wrong with them if they're not as perfect. And he says on page 35, but those people over-identify with their emotions. Everything is justified for no other reason than they felt it. What does that sound like? But decision making based on emotional intuition without the aid of reason to keep it in line pretty much always sucks. You know who bases their entire life on their emotions? 3-year-old kids and dogs. You know what else 3-year-olds and dogs do? Shit on the carpet. I just absolutely loved this part of the book. Like, I forget which clip he talks about, but like if Mark Manson is an extremist in any way, it's about taking responsibility. And I love this idea of like, you know, being emotional intelligent. You're not the exception. You're not a special snowflake. Like you have to get with reality, and you know, you have to follow the rules and be fair and work with everyone. You can't just be like, oh, I'm exceptional, so you have to make all these exceptions for me. But I think that is the wrong idea we get from certain sources like social media and certain toxic religions and other things. So any thoughts on this? Okay.
Form number one is
So he says on page 47, but a person who actually has a high sense of self-worth is able to look at the negative parts of his character frankly. Yes, sometimes I'm irresponsible with money. Yes, sometimes I exaggerate my own successes. Yes, sometimes I rely on others to support me, and I should be more self-reliant, and then acts to improve upon them. But entitled people, because they are incapable of acknowledging their own problems openly and honestly, are incapable of improving their lives in any lasting or meaningful way. They're left chasing high after high and accumulate greater and greater levels of denial. But eventually, reality must hit, and the underlying problems will once again make themselves clear. It's just a question of when and how painful it will be. Again, like, I thought of the church and like all these communities where they're saying like, no, we're going to have our temple steeple height the way we want it. And like, there's backlash to that. There's consequences. Like people have long memories, and, you know, it's in the church's best interest to get real with reality, because the longer that they do these behaviors, like it's just going to be more painful once they have to finally do confront like, why aren't we growing? Why don't people like us? Why are we literally the third most negatively perceived religion in the world and climbing? Like, But anyway, I don't know if that's too much of a tangent there. Any thoughts before we move on? Yeah, Landon.
I was just going to say that this to me is the biggest problem of the church overall that I can think of, is they will not acknowledge a problem. There is no such thing as a problem in the church. Everything must be presented as if it's perfect. There's no problems. Nothing needs to be dealt with. The Lord is in control. No need to look for anything that could be potentially wrong. And if you point it out, my gosh, you are evil to point out that the church might possibly have a problem they could improve upon.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I 100% resonate with that. And it's crazy making how in denial they are, and how much, you know, I mean, I'm only, you know, just now going into the literature of like blacks in the priesthood, but my understanding right now is still right now today in 2024, they have never said sorry for that. They've never taken responsibility for that. The closest they've come is they'll like say like, well, it was wrong, but it's not our fault. Like God still required it of us. We just don't know why. Like that's basically what I've come to. But that's not the same as taking responsibility and acknowledging that, like, yeah, the prophets made mistakes and they doubled down on it, and their motivation was like they just don't go there at all. They just give these superficial things of like, well, you know, we've corrected it now, so let's just move forward. We're not going to actually take
That
responsibility and acknowledge it.
that was one of the things when I remember one of my shelf-breaking moments. I was sitting in church and we were talking about blacks in the priesthood, and all these people were telling stories about how they had, when it was announced, they'd just been waiting for it. Their mother, had known it was coming, and they all were waiting for the Lord to make the change. And I said, wow, if everybody knew this was wrong, how come nobody said anything? How come nobody said this isn't right and stood up for it? And then I said, is that the kind of person I want to be? Do I want to see something wrong in the church and not say something and just sit back and hope it changes?
I've been amazed at the shift that we've gone from, of like, a prophet isn't infallible. Sometimes they speak as a man, but like a prophet will never lead you astray. If you can't, I mean, what happened to the teaching of prophets see around corners? Like they're speaking out of both sides of their mouths, and it's just very confusing. That whole topic, like especially the Mormon stories, Stick of Joseph presentation went over that.
Kendall,
yeah, go ahead, Ron.
Kendall, you're breaking up and your video's freezing a lot.
Okay.
Anything you can do to lighten up your internet load?
Let me see here. Let me connect to a different Wi-Fi. But go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, so last year we did the trip to the Mountain Meadows massacre site. We had Barbara Brown there that would gave us a tour of the place, and as we're walking back, I was talking to her and asking her about I think it was when they memorialized, or they dedicated the memorial that they had recently built there, and they had Henry Eyring come in, and he gave a very strong emotional talk about the incident, but he never quite took responsibility for it, but he put on a great show of being very emotional about it. So it gave the impression that they had apologized for the incident, but without actually saying the words, they apologized. And I see the same kind of thing in the Race and the Priesthood Gospel Topic essay, where it sounds like when they say they disavow these previous theories, that they're saying that these theories or these statements about why the priesthood was banned was wrong. People will read that and think that they're like apologizing or they're admitting that they did something wrong. But if you look up the definition and look closely with the words, they're not actually apologizing. They're not saying it was wrong. They're just saying, well, it was a theory, and we're not going to say if it was wrong or right, but we're going to give you the impression that we just don't want to take responsibility for it. So we disavow as to not take responsibility for something.
Yeah, if I were to summarize the church media and public relations arm of the church in a sentence, it would be they issue carefully worded statements.
Yes.
And the week that I decided to stop attending church was the week after the $5 million SEC fine for hiding the 36 some odd billions of stock for 22 years. And I remember reading that press release, knowing, more of the facts behind it, and just being like, holy cow, like they are, to the maximum extent possible, lying without technically lying, but knowing that their audience will come away with a false impression, the impression that they want them to have. Like that was the last straw for me. I was like, I was so worried at the time of like, how's this going to affect my children and my social life and stuff. But like, after I read that statement, I was like, I am done. Okay. So the key to happiness, he says, like Yvonne already mentioned, comes from solving the right problem. So that's what this clip is about.
Happiness comes from solving problems. If you either pretend you have no problems in your life to solve, then you won't be happy. But if you also have problems in your life that you feel you can't solve, then you won't be happy. So kind of the secret sauce is finding problems that you kind of want to have or kind of enjoy having. And that's how I wrap up the chapter with a section called Choose Your Struggle. Now I'll actually read the first couple paragraphs of that section because it's one of the most important sections of the book, and it's resonated with a lot of people. So if I ask you, what do you want out of your life? And you say something like, I want to be happy and have a great family and a job I like, your response is so common and expected that it doesn't mean anything. Everybody enjoys what feels good. Everybody wants to live a carefree, happy, and easy life, to fall in love and have amazing sex and relationships, to look perfect and make lots of money and be popular and well-respected and admired. Everybody wants that. It's easy to want that. A more interesting question, a question that most people never consider, is what pain do I want in my life? What am I willing to struggle for?
Okay, class,
because that actually seems to be a greater determinant of how our lives turn out.
After 2 minutes,
the video is still playing. We couldn't hear what you were saying.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, and the video is stopped.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I checked my connection. It's over 80 megabits, so I don't know what's going on.
Your video was playing while you were making comments, so you were talking over the audio from your video.
Yeah, that's why I wonder, because like on my end, I started talking after the clip was done. Like I saw the slider finish, so maybe it's my connection still. I don't know. But either way, this is a question worth pondering, I think, because we all want these things, but I really do like how he highlights the fact that, like, okay, those things are fine, but it's more interesting to look at it from the reverse and be like, okay, all these things that you want, like a really great relationship, a really great successful career, those things come with certain struggles and certain pains. Do you want to really choose those things? Because you can't have one without the other. And it's really helpful to ask it in the reverse, because it's like, okay, depending on your goals, you're also choosing your pain. What struggles are you choosing? What struggles are worth it to you? This was actually really helpful and enlightening to me. I don't know if anyone else has a similar reaction to that. But yeah, this idea of happiness comes from solving problems. On page 31, he says, happiness and success doesn't magically appear when you finally make enough money to add on that extra room to the house. You don't find it waiting for you in a place, an idea, a job, or even a book for that matter. Happiness is a constant work in progress because solving problems is a constant work in progress. The solutions to today's problems will lay the foundation for tomorrow's problems, and so on. True happiness occurs only when you find the problems you enjoy having and enjoy solving, which again goes back to my story of Buddhism, is like the dukkha, like accept negativity, accept problems, and you'll be happier. Like you won't be happy in avoiding problems or deluding yourself into thinking you don't have problems, but rather just like equipping yourself to go at things and make them actually better. Like it's not a new idea, but it's still a powerful idea. Bruce and then Landon.
Yeah, I totally agree. Solving problems. I mean, I guess like Landon, I didn't realize what Landon actually did, but I was a project manager for 30 years at my company, and solving problems, is what I did in my own life. But the big difference is, for my early life, the list of problems I was given by some external force of the church. And so I can remember times about the biggest problem in my life was whether I was running the little factory too much, and that was consuming my life. And once I left, there's so many problems that I want and need to solve, but they're not the ones the Mormon church gave me. Whether I'm taking the sacrament with my right hand, or this happened after I was a kid, whether I was wearing a white shirt to church. When I was a kid, white shirts weren't a thing. I mean, I passed the sacrament with, 1970s John Travolta colored shirts and stuff like that. So the white shirt thing hadn't come in. But yeah, given a list of things that you should be worried about and solving the problem, takes your focus away from how life really works.
Yeah, yeah, it really distorts our priorities and our happiness. Like if you are told, like if you do this behavior that the medical community says is totally fine and normal, but like you do it and it consumes your life. Like think of all the wasted energy, all the wasted happiness because you're fixated on this thing that your church has told you is so vital when you have a choice to not care about that. But you don't have a choice if that's the only source of life advice that you're getting. It's tragic to me. Landon.
I just had one of those moments. I just had to step away because my grandson FaceTimed me. He just turned 2 this week, and he couldn't wait. I told him, I'm in book club. I'll call you back. And she said, he wants to show you something. So I ran and FaceTimed him, and he was showing me how he could get on the toilet and take the toilet paper and rip it off, and how he was going to be able to wipe, and then how he could wash his hands. And he was just thrilled that he had a problem that he was going to solve and he was working on solving. And to see a 2-year-old and just the joy that he had that he was working on this problem and finding a solution, it made my whole day.
Yeah, that's sort of a tangent for me, but I read a lot about parental literature and stuff, and that's actually one of the best ways to develop confidence and a good relationship with kids is empower them. I mean, if you think about it from a child's point of view, how often they're told like, no, not yet, you don't understand. They're just constantly pushed down. And if you can somehow empower them to be like, yeah, you can solve this, you can do it's one of the best things a parent can do. So I like that story a lot. Thank you for sharing. And then on page 31, he says at the end, like our struggles determine our successes and our problems birth our happiness. So just a short couplet that summarizes that. That's a big takeaway from the book, in my opinion. Every time I read a book, I have a list of like, does the author fulfill their promises of the book? What are the quick wins? What are the key terms? And that for me is a quick win. Okay.
Rebecca has her.
So, sorry. Oh yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
Yes, I
Happiness comes.
Oh. Oops. Did the video start? Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you in the video.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. No, this part of the book was kind of a gut check for me because I'm notorious for avoiding pain and problems. I like to just kind of push them down the road. I like to take care of pain and problems for others, and I parented my kids that way, and I'm now reaping the benefits of that, which means that, okay, I was a helicopter mom. I admit it, but that's just something in my personality that I want to alleviate pain. And it's only in hindsight that I recognized that if I had been a little more letting my kids go through things, it would have built some personality traits that would have been valuable going into adulthood. And I think a lot of us of my age are like that. The helicopter parent is a real thing. So yeah, that chapter definitely made me go, damn, why didn't I read this book 30 years ago? But again, that's just my personality. But I think it's interesting when you see parents, speaking of parenting in the church, who the church has created problems for them as parents that don't really exist. I have a friend whose child is incredible, going to medical school, in an incredible relationship. I mean, just anybody would be proud to have this person as a child. But what's wrong with this child? This child is in a same-sex relationship and has left the church. Okay. So in my friend's eyes, it's a huge problem, and they're not able to see because the church has made this a problem for them. It's not a problem that they can solve at all. And they're devastated instead of being able to celebrate and enjoy this incredible child that they have, their incredible accomplishments. So it's interesting that because of being a part of the church, you're presented with these problems that aren't really problems, but to you they are, and you can never fix them. You can never get past them. You can never have the satisfaction of solving them. You're just stuck in limbo, and they're not real, and it really affects relationships between people. So
yep,
that's
of
a sad
all the
outcome.
of all the things that you could give an F about this person, this is the thing that will define them.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Not their talents,
Yeah.
not their personality, not
Yeah.
their gifts, not all the things that no, it's about this one aspect of their thing and that dominates, like that is what your external world is forcing upon you to give an F about. And I hate that, but that's a good example of what I think he's saying. Like we can choose to give an F about other things, not the things that others tell us. Like that's a great example of that. And that dovetails into our next big point. He says another problem is the certainty that we want to have. The problem is that when we're certain, it has certain side effects such as delusion.
And then I talk about the dangers of certainty. And this is one of the more fun sections of the book. I actually had a cyber stalker for a number of years. She was nonviolent, thank God. What was remarkable about her was that she had this unbelievable certainty, like absolutely unshakable certainty, in completely batshit crazy beliefs. I mean, she literally told me to my face that angels told her that we were supposed to be together, that God said that our relationship was going to cure death. These were things that she said to me. And whenever I tried to kind of poke holes in them or point out that maybe that didn't make a lot of sense, it had absolutely no effect. She met my wife, no effect, didn't change her mind at all. To me, it was fascinating in that maybe one of the most troubled people I've ever known in my life was also probably the most certain and unshakable person I've ever met in my life. And so I use her as an example of the binds that certainty can get us into. And then I use a number of examples, from my own life and from other people's lives, and then I kind of trot out the benefits of uncertainty. It opens up space for you to learn and improve. It helps guard you against like extremist ideology or just becoming like a crazy zealot for some cause. It opens room for dialogue with people, to learn from other people, to make other people feel more heard, which improves relationships. I've got a section in here that I call Manson's Law of Avoidance, which I decided to be cheeky and name a law after myself. But Manson's Law of Avoidance says that the more something threatens your identity, the more you will avoid it. And I bring this up in terms of what are the pieces of information that we protect ourselves from? Because ultimately, like grasping onto some sense of certainty, it's a means of protecting our ego from perceived threats. And so Manson's law basically says that like the more threatening something is, the more we will become certain in things that will help us avoid dealing with that truth.
Does that sound familiar? Anyone know people that do mental gymnastics because they're so threatened that the opposite of what they believe could be true, that they just have to do whatever it takes to cling on to that belief? I just think that is very important for each of us to understand, because that is our psychology. Like it's scary to not be certain. Like that was one of the first things that I missed about not being a traditional believer anymore, is that I just thought I was right. Like I was given all the answers and we're right and the world is wrong. And that was, it felt good. And I missed that at first. But if we really care about truth and growth and solving problems, I think uncertainty is absolutely the way to do that. Let's get our egos out of the picture. Let's just look at things, be like, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, and what I don't know will always outweigh the things that I do know. And that humility should give us the tools to be open and learning and actually help the situation get better. Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, I've expressed this in many of the book clubs. The narrative of how the world works when I was a believing Mormon is so different than the narrative I understand now. And the book club, I mean, we've done books on genetics, we've done, Sapiens, we're going to do Homo Deus this year. We've done things like 1491, what the Americas were like before Columbus, and it wasn't the Nephites. But my understanding of the world and uncertainty just has exploded since I got away from that narrow narrative. But it's given me the ability to appreciate my life, and I'm still working on understanding how the world actually works. And I think that's free. So
yeah, it absolutely is. But like he goes like this to me is like the section of the book, like I forget which chapter it is, but like in my copy of the book, like page 71 and on, because he goes into great detail of like okay, what are the things that you thought were certain, and how can we re-examine them to see if they actually concord with reality, to see if they actually are making you happy, to see if they actually make the world better. And one of the quotes in that section, he says, "These why questions are difficult and often take months, even years to answer. Most people have to go to some sort of therapist just to hear these questions being asked for the first time. Such questions are important because they illuminate what we consider success or failure. Why do you feel angry? Is it because you failed to achieve some goal? Why do you feel lethargic and uninspired? Is it because you don't think you're good enough?" This layer of questioning helps us understand the root causes of our emotions that overwhelm us. Once we understand the root cause, then we can begin to do something about it and change it. And then there's another even deeper level of the self-awareness onion, and that is full of effing tears. This third level is about our personal values. Why do I consider this to be a success or a failure? How am I choosing to measure myself? By what standard am I judging myself and everyone around me? This level takes incredible questioning and effort, and is difficult to reach, but it's the most important because our values determine the nature of our problems, and the nature of our problems determines the qualities of our lives. Again, to me, this is the big idea of the book, is like the F's you give your happiness all comes down to what you subjectively value. And we can examine those values and adopt new values. And that's when, the big changes occur. I think it's one of the most profound things that you can realize, but it's really hard to be like, okay, right now in this moment, I, Kendall, have beliefs that are irrational, that don't work, that harm others. Am I really going to take the time to examine those and adopt better beliefs? Most people, the answer is no, because like we said at the beginning of this presentation, like the pain isn't great enough to go there. Like we just are busy and we want to go on with our lives. And that's kind of what this quote says, is the most certain people often are the most dangerous. And so we have to have that intellectual humility to question things, to be in that zone of uncertainty and discomfort, so that we aren't perpetuating these evil, bad outcomes and beliefs onto ourselves and onto others. And I like how he kind of gives a solution to this problem, and that's what this clip is about. This is from chapter 6.
An extension of Manson's law of avoidance is that we should define ourselves as loosely and ambiguously as possible, because the less defined our self is, the less we need to cling to defense mechanisms or faulty ideas to protect ourselves. This is fundamentally a Buddhist idea, the idea of no self. If there is no such thing as self, then there's nothing to protect, and there's nothing that you need to be certain about in the first place. Finally, I finish up the chapter with a few questions to help you become more uncertain in your life. Question number 1 is, what if I'm wrong? Question number 2 is, what would it mean if I were wrong? Question number 3 is, would being wrong create a better or worse problem than my current problem, both for myself and others? And that's chapter 6.
And page 133, he says, when someone finally admits to themselves, maybe I'm not that good at relationships, then she is suddenly free to act and end her bad marriage. She has no identity to protect by staying in a miserable, crappy marriage just to prove something to herself. When the student admits to himself, maybe I'm not so much of a rebel, maybe I'm just scared, then he's free to be ambitious again. He has no reason to feel threatened by pursuing lofty academic dreams and maybe failing. And again, I talked about this in the last time I presented, but that was what was preventing me from looking into my shelf. I defined myself as a institute teacher. Like that was my dream job. That's who I was. And I wasn't capable of questioning all the things that went into that identity until I got divorced and my life started just not working on a fundamental level that I couldn't keep it all up anymore. But that process of revising our values, looking at our identity, like it's really hard. And like one of the things that I've realized this year is like, this book,
Kendall, you're
purports
freezing.
to solve
You're freezing
certain
up.
problems, but sometimes the pain of the problem. Again, let me check my connection. Yeah, I'm getting 50, 60, 70. I don't know what's going on. But anyway, can you hear me now?
You're still breaking up. Maybe stop sharing your screen.
Okay. Let's do that. Is that better?
Yeah, it might be your CPU load.
Huh, I have 16 cores, but okay. But anyway, I don't know how much of that you heard, but like just being patient with ourselves and realizing that, sometimes the solution is more psychologically taxing because there are benefits to the problems. That's why we keep them in our lives. I don't know if that makes sense, but Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah, I really like this part because I feel that I spent most of my life around people that were very certain at church. And I've talked about before how I was agnostic pretty much from as long as I can remember. I never really believed in the church, but everywhere I went at church, people were crying, they were bearing testimony, they were saying, I know, I'm sure. And I remember just thinking, even when I was younger, what is happening? Why are they doing this? What do they know? What's making them cry? Why are they saying, it's very unsettling to me to be around all these people that are certain. But I realize there's yeah, certain, of course, certain, not until some of us stand up and just say, I'm not certain and I'm out. Do other people also, and I remember one woman, she would have been a young woman, I guess, because I was probably about 10. No, I was probably younger than that. But she stood up in testimony meeting, and I've told the story before, and I'm a little kid, and it was when you took the mic around, and talked into the mic. And she said, I don't know the church is true. I don't know that at all. I'm not sure at all. I don't know. And I remember there was just this silence because, this is in the 70s. Nobody says stuff like that, right? And my mom whispers to me, I think she has some mental problems, But to me, I was like, can you say that? Because that's how I feel. So embracing uncertainty is the first step to finding out what you really do believe, right? Which is kind of the motto here of the book club. So I don't know if any of the rest of you feel that way, but to be surrounded by certainty all the time that you suspect, it's really not healthy.
It's really not. And it's really a lot of pressure, like scrupulosity and like the need to be like, oh, everyone else has this experience. So now I'm going to lie to myself that I had it too. I mean, so many things compound. And on page 134, he says, my recommendation, don't be special. Don't be unique. Redefine your metrics in mundane and broad ways. Choose to measure yourself not as a rising star or an undiscovered genius. Instead, choose to measure yourself not as some horrible victim or dismal failure, but instead measure yourself by mundane identities, a student, a partner, a friend, a creator, a supportive aunt, or whatever. But the more narrow and rarer the identity you choose for yourself, the more everything will seem to threaten you. For that reason, define yourself in more simple and ordinary ways, and then you'll be less threatened, more open to growth, not as victimized, etc. So I think, again, another very, very helpful point. Okay, let's try this again here.
I think Brian has a comment.
Oh, go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
Yeah, a little earlier in the book, but to what we're talking about, the section where he talks about emotions being overrated. One of the sections I really liked where he talks about emotions, he says, are feedback mechanisms telling that something is either likely right or likely wrong for us. Nothing more, nothing less. And emotions are simply biological signals designed to nudge you in the direction of beneficial change. And emotions are part of the equation of our lives, but not the entire equation. Just because something feels good doesn't mean it is good. Just because something feels bad doesn't mean it is bad. Emotions are merely signposts, suggestions that our neurobiology gives us, not commandments. Therefore, we shouldn't always trust our own emotions. In fact, I believe we should make a habit of questioning them. And such a healthier way of viewing emotion. Signposts that we can still question. We can trust them to point us in a direction, but maybe not take them as absolute. But I mean, how often in the church are we told, you felt this way, you felt this emotion, therefore, and now all of a sudden, all the significance, all this interpretation is given to us for us, rather than letting us learn to interpret and understand our emotions ourselves. We're told how to interpret them, how to understand them, and how unhealthy that ends up being for so many of us.
Absolutely. I didn't go as much into that section because there's just so much there. I'm glad you brought it up. But yeah, how our feelings define us, our feelings control us. And the first thing I thought of was how like a vertical morality system that like teaches people to distrust their own intuitions and be told like this is what this means, this is what this feeling means, and you have to do this as a result. Like there's just so many problems with that. And again, on page 128, he says, the more you try to be certain about something, the more insecure and uncertain you will feel. But the converse is true as well. The more you embrace being uncertain and not knowing, the more comfortable you will feel in knowing that you don't know things. Uncertainty removes our judgments of others. It preempts the unnecessary stereotyping and biases that otherwise we would feel when we see someone on TV, in the office, or on the street. Uncertainty also relieves us of our judgments of ourselves. We don't know if we're lovable or not. We don't know how attractive we are. We don't know how successful we could potentially become. The only way to achieve these things is to remain uncertain of them and be open to finding them out through experience. Uncertainty is the root of all progress and all growth. And on page 83 that I have up here, it's far more helpful to assume you're ignorant and don't know a whole lot. This keeps you unattached to superstitious or poorly informed beliefs and promotes a constant state of learning and growth. Like we've been saying, if you're certain, it's kind of insulting to suggest that you have something you need to learn or something you don't know. And we all know those people that are so close-minded that they won't even listen to another perspective. They're just absolutely, they start off on step one that they're right, and anyone that goes against that, they're wrong and they're victimizing me. Go ahead, Rebecca.
I just wanted to say, if anyone wants to see this in real time, this concept of certainty and not listening, and the concept of a person being open, you need to watch the Mormon Stories episode from last week with John DeLynn and the two brothers from the Stick of Joseph. I don't know how many of you saw that. It ended up going 6 hours, but it was an absolute example of people that are so certain there is absolutely no wiggle room or even discussion, and someone else trying to just have a dialogue. If you can't watch the entire 6 hours, watch the last half hour or the last hour. You will be astounded at what you see, but it's a perfect example of exactly what you're describing, Kendall.
Yeah, I was watching it last night, and at about the 2.5 hour mark, there's a 20-minute discussion where they just keep moving the goalposts. Like it's the fallacy of just like, oh, well, that doesn't work. Then we're just going to say that the definition is wrong. Oh, that doesn't work either. Well, we're just going to have this loophole be the answer. Like they can always think of an answer. Like they're not satisfied. They have to find some way to remain justified and certain, like no matter how crazy or weird the mental gymnastic is. And I just felt pity for them because I was the same way. Like I wanted it to be true so much that I would go there and do that. Okay, so I already gave you the big idea, but this is a clip that kind of really goes into the how and connects of like the values we choose really do determine almost everything else as far as our reactions and the things that we value and take action in our life about.
Good values tend to be 1, reality-based, 2, socially constructive, and 3, immediate and controllable. Bad values tend to be 1, superstitious, 2, socially destructive, and 3, not immediate or controllable. I go on to say honesty is a good value because it's something you can have complete control over, it reflects reality, and it benefits others.
Again, go through this process of like, you know, are these two people in the stick of Joseph, like, do their values, like, are they reality-based? Are they controllable? Or are they superstitious and not controllable, so they can just keep, you know, redefining them and remaining certain because it's not real. And so he says, you know, it's incumbent upon all of us to become self-aware of this process. And there's multiple layers. We kind of already went over this process, but just layer 1 is understanding why you're reacting. You know, like, why are you angry? Why are you defending this belief so strongly? What's behind that? Layer 2 is an ability to ask why. So why am I feeling this? And then layer 3, the hardest thing is like, what value does this emotion come from? Like, if I'm wrong, change my whole world view, or like my tribe won't accept me anymore. Like, why do you care so much that this thing is true or not true? Or this, you know, attribute that you have it or don't have it, like what's at stake. Page 71, he says, we all have emotional blind spots. Often they have to do with emotions that we were taught were inappropriate growing up. It takes years of practice and effort to get good at identifying these blind spots in ourselves and then expressing the affected emotions appropriately. This task is hugely important, but worth the effort. And I don't know if any of your experiences is the same, but I kind of had this short-circuited for me, and I was given, you know, simpler answers, easier ways to solve things. Like, again, just pray about it and find, you know, a way to justify, you know, this vertical morality answer rather than like actually understanding, like, what does Kendall want? What does Kendall value? What does make him happy? And that might be different than what my family or my church leaders have told me. And like, only in the last few years have I started that process, and it's been so hard. And I wish I would have had that process throughout my life, but I feel like it was taken away from me. Any thoughts about becoming self-aware and looking at our blind spots so that we can become equipped to handle our reactions and control our happiness better? Yeah, Bruce.
Well, I can remember I was exactly on Arlington Avenue in Riverside, California. I just met with our family's trust attorney. I was listening to Jeremy Runnels' interview on Mormon Stories, and it just hit me, and I internalized it's all bullshit. I mean, soup to nuts, the pre-existence, this life, the afterlife, everything the church taught me. After listening to a lot, I internalized, okay, it's all bullshit. And then it comes up to, how does the world work then? Because, you know, I had been inactive for 20, almost 30 years, had nothing to do with the church, but I still believe that basic narrative. And when that shelf breaks, boy, you have to rebuild your whole life. And it's not easy.
Yeah, there's a lot at stake, and you want to protect your time and energy and identity. Like, yeah, so it makes sense that you would not want to go there. Okay, so just more about this idea of like, you can choose what you value and your struggles. And again, one of the biggest themes for me is this idea of taking responsibility, and that's not the same as blame.
The big kind of epiphany of this chapter is that you are always choosing, whether you realize it or not. There's no such thing as a situation where you are not choosing your struggle or not choosing your problem. The only thing that changes is whether you admit it to yourself or not. People don't like hearing this point. They don't like hearing the idea that every problem in their life, they chose it. And the second section of this chapter, the reason why is I point out that we tend to conflate responsibility and fault. We assume that if you are responsible for something, it means that it's your fault. But these are two completely different things. You know, it's like if I get cancer, it's not my fault that I got cancer, but it is absolutely my responsibility to deal with the cancer. You know, if somebody leaves a newborn baby on my doorstep, that's not my fault that somebody left it there, but it is absolutely my responsibility. I have to do something about it. And every moment of life is this way. Even if the mob boss kidnaps your family, makes you run a marathon, you are choosing to run the marathon. You are choosing for the lives of the people you care about to be more important than the pain of the marathon. The thing you are choosing from moment to moment is how to value each experience. So even if let's say I go to a baseball game and I'm bored to tears, I'm choosing to be bored. Why? Because I'm choosing not to be interested in the baseball game. Sure, I could sit there and blame the baseball game like, oh, you're so fucking boring. Why don't you entertain me more? Well, why don't I change my definition of entertainment? Why don't I change what I find interesting? Why don't I develop the ability to pay more attention or appreciate the subtleties of throwing a curveball or something? In each experience in life, there is a component of choice embedded in it. And we tend not to be aware of that choice, but as soon as we become aware of it, two things happen. One, we become way more comfortable with pain. And two, we actually get off our ass and fucking do something. Because now we don't care whose fault it is anymore. We don't care if it's boring or tedious or unfair. You fucking do something. You realize in every moment you have a choice to do something or not do something, to blame somebody else or take responsibility yourself. And once you develop that habit or that value of constant responsibility, everything
I thought
fucking
this
changes.
was one of the big ideas of the book. We are not blameworthy, but we have to take responsibility for the things that happen to us. And his anecdote about baseball reminded me about the research that Martin Seligman has done about happiness. And one of the examples he gives is like, you know, when you play board games, like almost everyone's goal when they play board games is they want to win. But, you know, 9 out of 10 board games, like only one person can win. So, you know, if 5 people are playing, like 4 are going to be frustrated and only 1 is going to be happy. Like he gives that as an example of like, look, at any time, you can change your value. You can change your objective. And he actually says to do that. Like if you find yourself being frustrated in a board game, change your goal from winning to something else. Like, oh, my goal now is to help this other person win, or my goal is to like make the whole board blue, or you know, just whatever. Like just change it to something that you have more control over and you'll be way happier. And it sounds trite, but it's a big deal in the greater picture of what makes us happy as humans, as far as like what we're choosing to focus on and what we actually have control over. And, you know, like what he says, like, are we aware that we're in control of our choices to that degree? Like most people just view themselves as victims to a large degree and never make that connection. So any thoughts or comments on responsibility versus blame, or we need to change what we value, change what we find interesting? We're always choosing our struggles. Any of those ideas? Okay, let's move on. Just wrapping up, there's only a few more slides left. He has this idea of like embracing rejection. It's a good thing. We shouldn't have our value be that we're perfect and we're above certain things like that.
Rejection makes your life better, which on a more philosophical note, if you think about this project of choosing what you value, in order to value one thing, you have to reject the other things. You know, it's like if I want to value my career over all else, I need to be able to sacrifice other things. That means I need to be able to reject other things. That means I need to reject my dream of becoming a pro gamer, or reject the idea that I'm going to become a software engineer, or reject the idea that I'm going to go live on a beach somewhere. If I choose one value to prioritize over everything else, that means by definition, I must be willing to reject other things. If I'm not willing to reject those things, then I'm not able to actually prioritize what's important in my life. And so this is why people who struggle to say no, they often feel very lost and they don't know what they want.
And this is why, like we were saying earlier, that this is just kind of a re-amalgamation of old ideas, but it for me reminded me of Buddhism, where like we can't have positivity all the time. We can't say yes to everything. We have to say no. We have to have some drawbacks. But in limiting ourselves, we can then commit to those other things better and succeed better at the fewer things that we're giving a fuck about. Because if we give a fuck about everything, we're in essence giving a fuck about almost nothing. Like we can't really commit and go deep. And just on page 119, one more thought about this Buddhist idea about positive and negative. He says, here's something that's weird but true. We don't actually know what a positive or negative experience is. Some of the most difficult and stressful moments of our lives also end up being the most formative and motivating. Some of the best and most gratifying experiences of our lives are also the most distracting and demotivating. Don't trust your conception of positive, negative experiences. All that we know for certain is what hurts in the moment and what doesn't. And actually, that's not worth much in the long run. I think that's really wise. Like what the archetypical, Buddhist story is the story about the son, or the farmer that has a son. They get a horse and he breaks his leg, and that leads to different outcomes that you don't really know in the moment are good or bad. That goes back to the theme of uncertainty. So anything in that clip or that quote that anyone has thoughts on or reactions to? Okay. This is basically the same clip, just like when you commit to something, it brings greater accomplishment, greater freedom, and it has all the things that you don't have to give a fuck about anymore because I've committed to this other greater thing.
There's kind of a hidden...
And then just one more clip to summarize the whole book. Again, like I chose the book initially, or rather voted for it for this upcoming season of the Good Book Club, because I was always told I have this problem of like caring too much and people pleasing. And again, he just kind of summarizes the whole book with regards to that question, and not letting the little petty things bother us with this quote right here.
Harsh truth of the day. The harsh truth of the day is that if you care too much what other people think, it's probably because you don't have something more important to care about. Think about it. Let's do a thought experiment. Let's pretend a baby is trapped in a burning building, and you're the only person that knows that that baby is there. Now all these people are standing around, and you're like, oh my god, I gotta go save that baby. And you start running into the building, and all these people are like, man, what's Mark doing? That's fucking crazy. Wow, you're an idiot, Mark. Who runs into a burning building? They start talking all this shit. Would that stop you from going into that building? No, you don't fucking care what people on the street think. There's a fucking kid who's about to die. You go save that fucking life. And when you come out, you also don't care what they think. You either did it or you didn't. If you come out and they're all like, oh my god, Mark, you're such a great guy, woohoo. It's like, what matters is the kid's life. Beyond the social validation, beyond the embarrassment, the approval, people agreeing or disagreeing with you, saving somebody's life is what matters in that moment. Now that's an extreme example, but the same principle plays out throughout life. You will stop caring what other people think about you when you have something more important to care about. When you have something worth being embarrassed over. When you have something worth being ridiculed for. When you believe in something so intensely that it's so important that if you're willing to lose friends or the respect of your neighbors, that's when you stop caring what other people think. And the irony of this, of course, is that that is the moment that everybody starts respecting you.
So again, that's just kind of a summary of the big idea. I think he oversimplifies it a little bit. Like, I don't think people automatically start respecting you in that way, but I think it does free ourselves from the expectations of others, because we know what we stand for, we know what we value, and the other values that people try to impose on us, we have the choice to reject and do what's important to us. So anyway, these are just some other final thoughts that I thought were good from the book. Reject others' priorities, accept suffering, define yourself as loosely as possible. If you don't have a rigid definition of yourself, then you get less defensive. Identify with the negative aspects of your person and do it so frankly. Like, yes, sometimes I'm this way, sometimes I'm mean, sometimes I'm arrogant, whatever. It's not a big deal. You're going to have a lot more freedom to be chill and relaxed and more happy. The last chapter is all about this. Regularly contemplate your own mortality. The fear of death follows from the fear of life. A man who lives fully is prepared to die at any time. Our struggles determine our successes. Our problems birth our happiness. The more uncomfortable an answer is, the more likely it is to be true. Again, kind of an oversimplistic aphorism, but has a certain type of power. We don't always control what happens to us, but we always control how we interpret what happens to us, as well as how we respond. That's big for me personally, as well as the next one. Take radical responsibility for your life. Responsibility is not the same as blame. Self-delusion is counteracted by our willingness to self-reflect and embrace negativity. And the best relationships come from having healthy boundaries, being told no, and accepting hard truths. And then again, just the whole book summed up in one sentence: happiness comes by caring, giving an F about something greater than yourself. And that's basically what I had prepared. That's, not everything in the book, but I think I covered most of the main points. So any final thoughts or things that were of great importance to others that I didn't go over, or reactions to this? What are people's final thoughts? Yeah, Ron.
So one of the things that I learned after leaving Mormonism is that I didn't no longer had to worry about being obedient. I could just focus on being good. So Mormonism gave us thousands of rules that we had to follow and do all this trivial, meaningless shit that didn't have any impact on how good of a person I was or how good my life or other people's lives around me would be. It just focused on, it just made me look like I fit in and was doing the things that everyone else in the group wanted to do. And now that I've left that, I have much fewer things to give a fuck about and just focus on what I can do to be good and what is really meaningful and important in life. And that is my favorite thing about leaving Mormonism.
Yeah, that's really inspiring to me. I'm still honestly, like, again, this is why I chose the book, is like a lot of these people-pleasing tendencies are still really hard for me. I think I can do what you said more once I find better people that are not in the Mormon tribe and judge me based off of those metrics. But like, when I'm told constantly that, like, oh, we're so sad, Kendall has chosen this life of misery, like, it's really hard to keep up that confidence when everyone around me is dunking on me so hard. And I know the solution is to find a better tribe. It's really hard to do that in the meantime before I have, a better social support network. But I love what you said. You're totally right. It's just hard when everyone is like interpreting my new beliefs and my new standards in such a negative way. Like, I can't please them. Like, nothing I do now in their eyes will ever be viewed as good, because now I'm this other, this non-believer, this heathen.
Well, that's why you're in the book club, Kendall, because we're your tribe, and
Right,
everybody in the
yes.
book club is. That is why we started it, honestly, to find a place where people could connect and talk and process. And you're exactly right. Once you're on the other side of that, you go and do the things that are important to you. You cut everything away and you realize this is important. So that is, you just described the origins of the book club 4.5 years ago.
Well, very good. I love these things. It's such a safe space, and I just thank you for hosting this and putting this on. I get so much out of it.
That's awesome. I think Bruce had one more comment, and then I think we'll wrap up.
Just a reminder, going on to finding your tribe, your chosen family. Some of my chosen family, I don't live in Utah, but we have Mylene's here, Jeff's here. These are my local chosen family in Southern California. And we have a mix and mingle afterwards. So if at all you've got the time and interest, we just sit and talk about, what's going on and stuff. As Rebecca said, this is kind of our little Zoom chosen tribe. And we do visit each other. I mean, I've met many people from the book club at different ex-Mormon gathering. So just plugging the mix and mingle afterwards.
I know, because we can't just leave it at 2 hours, right? We have to go for that third hour. It's just ingrained in us. We just can't not do it.
Not giving an F lets me wear shirts like this.
There you go.
Landon. I think it
Great.
actually is age
Great job,
related
Kendall.
too. No, I feel like the
Yeah,
older you
yeah.
get,
The older you get, the less
the less you care. That's a stereotype, but I think that's true. You're just like, I'm going to do what I want to do with the people that I want to do it. So interesting. Well, Kendall, once again, a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. You do such a good job on this. And Kendall's taken another book too this season, which is great. We always love that. So thank you, Kendall. You never disappoint and you're amazing. And please, as he has up on the screen, he's got an awesome website. He's got awesome other stuff you guys can look at. And we've had him on Mormonish before, and we've had people say, oh my gosh, he's incredible. And so we're always happy to share other places that you can interact with Kendall and all of the things that he does. So bravo.
Yeah, starting on my birthday on my YouTube channel, I'm counting down because that's, what I'm about. Like I'm not an institute teacher anymore. I literally thought that I was cataloging all the best answers to solve the world's problems because the church had all the answers. Now that I've had to throw that out, I'm collecting a new database of wisdom, and I'm really gonna try. Like, it sounds crazy, but my goal is to rank the most helpful beliefs that would go the furthest to empowering people and to change the world, because I'm rejecting my old beliefs and I'm trying to find new beliefs that work better in the world. So that's what my YouTube channel is about. At Kendall C. The name of my project is called Learned Empowerment.
That sounds amazing. When's your birthday? When does this all start?
September 17th, Constitution Day.
Okay. So coming up really quick. Everybody go check that out. That sounds absolutely incredible. We'll have to talk to you more about that, Kendall. That's really good. So
yeah.
All right. So our presentation segment is over. And as Bruce mentioned, we'll go through a couple slides here at the end as we're going to preview our next book. And then we will turn off the recording and just have our mix and mingle, because that part is not recorded. That's just to hang out if you want and talk. So if we can kind of go to our end slides here.
I need Kendall to stop sharing.
Book. Oh, Kendall has to stop sharing. Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Kendall, you just share too much, dang it.
Yep, I've been told that.
Guy he is.
And that's okay. All right. So we just finished this. Another round of applause for Kendall. That was incredible. Our next book is Armageddon by Bart Ehrman. Oh my gosh. I started this. Landon started it too. This is absolutely amazing. I can't think of anything more timely than to read a book about the end times. And let's figure out what they're really about, right? Because we hear this all the time in so many places about the end is near, it's almost the end, Revelations. Let's find out what it all really means. I'll just read a very quick blurb from the beginning here in the dust jacket. It says, you'll find nearly everything the Bible has to say about the end in the book of Revelations, a mystifying prophecy filled with bizarre symbolism, violent imagery, mangled syntax, confounding contradictions, and the very firm ideas about the horrors that await us all. But no matter what you think Revelation reveals, whether you read it as a literal description or of what will soon to come to pass, or interpret it as a metaphorical expression of hope for those suffering now, or simply recognize its highlights from pop culture, you're almost certainly wrong. In Armageddon, acclaimed New Testament authority Bart Ehrman delves into the most misunderstood and possibly the most dangerous, I think all of us would probably agree with that, book of the Bible on a fascinating tour through 3 millennia of Judeo-Christian thinking about how our world will end. So, it's funny because I got this on Audible. I'm like, just start listening a little bit. It's still a month away. Like, I sped through over half of it. You just honestly can't put it down. And Bart Ehrman is just incredible. So please, everybody, go out and get this. And this will be on October 13th, right in the middle of the month. It's kind of a Halloween-y book because, like you said, mayhem, horrors, mangled syntax, it's going to be scary. So grab that and we'll see you guys.
Mark is on, who's presenting the book. Mark's joined us from Holland, right, Mark? Oh, you're muted.
Oh, somebody should have told me he was going to give the preview and I didn't realize he was here. I stole your thunder, Mark. I'm so sorry.
That's fine, Rebecca. It's my first time in the book club.
Excellent.
I'm Mark from Belgium.
Oh,
Belgium.
excellent.
Okay.
Belgium. I love Belgium.
Okay.
Yeah, Mark is going to be our presenter for the book next month. So we weren't sure if he was going to make it or not to give the little preview. I kind of read the dust jacket. Is there anything else you'd like to add for everybody as we look forward to this next month?
Maybe I can just quickly introduce myself, so at least you know who will be talking to you. So I'm Mark from Belgium. I was baptized in the Catholic Church when I was a baby. When I was 12 years old, I asked the Catholic priest some questions he couldn't answer. So I became an atheist. Then, and when I was 22, I met the Mormon missionaries. I became a Mormon, went on a mission, got married in the temple. I had a lot of leadership positions in the church in Belgium. Then I was not a lazy learner, so I studied church history, scriptures, and I came to understand that the Mormon church is not what she claims to be. I'm still a member because I love the members a lot more than they love me. But some of them are scared of me, so I hope I won't scare you. But to talk about the book of Bart Ehrman, he has written about 33 books. I think I have about 15 of those, so I don't know him a little bit. We'll talk about what apocalyptic writing is. And some people want to meet Jesus in the sky. That should be fun. And of course, we will talk about the book of Revelation. Now, we will find out who is the famous 666 and compare Jesus of the Gospels with the Jesus in Revelation.
Ooh, I'm excited for that.
Mm-hmm. Now, and we can ask the question, and I think Bart gives some answer. Is the book of Revelation about the future or about the past? So it should be fun or scary. So hope to see you there. It's nice to meet you all.
Yeah, welcome. We love it when people join the book club and then right away say, sure, I'll lead a discussion. That's our kind of person. So no, this is going to be great. It's wonderful to meet you, Mark. So, all right. Looking forward to that.
Belgian waffles for next.
Yes.
We have brunch with Belgian waffles.
Now that sounds good. Now you're speaking my language. All right, just a few quick slides and then we'll move to our mix and mingle. Just want to make sure everybody knows that if you happen to miss a book club episode or want to catch up on ones from the past, you can go to anywhere you find your Audible or audio podcasts and look for the Good Book Club podcast, or you can go to YouTube and you can search the Good Book Club for Post Mormons. And we do post everything there so that you can catch up on past discussions. So, or if you happen to miss. We also kind of curate the Good Media Club, where we just on Facebook throw up information about things that are in the media that are Mormon centric. We, of course, are now all talking about the secret lives of Mormon wives. Oh my goodness, things like that. So that's something on Facebook if you're interested in more media just beyond books. And of course, we also have Mormonish podcasts that Landon and I run, and we have lots of interesting guests. We often have people from book clubs, sometimes book club presentations. So it's all kind of intermingled, and you can find that on YouTube or wherever you find your podcasts. And if you are new with us and you're not really a member of the book club, there's a couple ways that you can kind of formally become a member to get the information. If you are not on social media or don't want to mess with that, you can just send me an email at thegoodbookclub@mail.com, and I will put you on our email list, and then you'll receive links and information about the books that way. If you'd like to just join our Facebook group, we have a lot of interaction there, and we put out, links and information. That's our logo right there, that row of books, and just search the Good Book Club on Facebook. You can also find us on Instagram too, but please try to connect because we have a lot of fun, a lot of really interesting people. If you do send me an email to the goodbookclub@mail.com, sometimes it goes to spam. So make sure that you check your spam box because I always will respond because we love when people join us. So now we'll turn off our recording. Thank you, everybody.